Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa has confirmed in the last 24 hours that South Africa's government has decided to refer Israel for investigation to the International Criminal Court for potential war crimes committed in Gaza. Just to recap, so far from the Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip, more than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed. More than 4,000 of the dead are said to be children in Gaza. It all followed the Hamas attacks, the Palestinian armed group Hamas, which attacked Israel on the 7th of October, killing about 1,200 people and taking over 200 hostages. Now, Israel has said it will not stop the bombardment of Gaza until it has basically obliterated Hamas. Let's bring in the University of Cape Town's Public Law Associate Professor Cathy Powell to talk about the ICC referral. Cathy, good to see you. You and I spoke about the ICC and its potential role in what's going on at the moment a few weeks ago, but now South Africa confirming a referral for possible war crimes. How much does that move us forward? Does it shift the needle at all legally?
It means that the prosecutor has to consider the request for investigation of these crimes and make a decision. Up till now, the prosecutor did have the capacity to ignore the matter or pick it up without any referral. But now that there's been a referral, the prosecutor has to consider the referral and make a decision whether to take the matter further. In other words, whether to investigate and set up a prosecution.
Is it absolutely necessary, though, this referral? And I ask that in the context of the ICC having had its chief out at the border between Egypt and Gaza a few days into the Israeli attacks on Gaza, and confirmation even from the office that from about 2021 they'd already established an office to look into the situation of the Palestinian people. So is the referral necessary, or would what the ICC was doing on its own have been sufficient? Okay, I want to see if
it may have been enough, but I'm not sure if it's going back to 2021. So what the South African referral might do is to add a new incident to the list of things that the prosecutor's office is investigating.
And one of the things that the prosecutor's office has already lamented, even in the notes that he issued after the trip to the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza, was that they are still trying to shore up resources to deal with the issues around the Palestinian situation, but it's not moving at a satisfactory pace or fast enough, if you will. When we look at where we are now, if this referral is filed now, how soon, how quickly might the process progress legally?
It's difficult to answer, and I think the reference to resources is major. The problem international criminal courts, but particularly the International Criminal Court, which is set up by the Rome Statute, is that it's relying on the participation and the involvement and the funding of donor states, and that can ebb and flow. So it's not an ideal situation. It's similar to one faced by countries. In any country who occasionally complain that they're not getting enough funding to do their work. But I think in the case of the ICC, it's particularly when political will starts to wane. However, I think in this case there might be a little bit more support to get the investigation moving.
And just in terms of the investigation itself, we know at the moment there's no access for international organizations to even get into Gaza to sort of establish what's been going on there. Would that be absolutely necessary in order for the investigation to be credible? So by that I mean allowing investigators to go into Gaza to independently investigate the thousands of deaths of Palestinians.
So that is the question of evidence and how one works out the probity of evidence. Now, given the amount of resources that have been gathered on the attack on Gaza, I think there is probably enough evidence for the prosecutor to decide to set up a prosecution. But you're right that to actually conduct the prosecution, which will be many years in the future, probably evidence is going to have to be gathered on the ground, if possible. As I've just said, many years in the future, one is not sure which evidence is left by then. Let me just explain what would have to happen. The prosecutor would have to decide to investigate, then have to decide to create a prosecution, to get arrest warrants for the people that the prosecutor wants to prosecute. And then we'd need to get the cooperation of the states where the accused people currently are. Israel is unlikely to cooperate at all. Palestine would if it could, but if at that stage Palestine is still under the control of Israel, it's going to be very hard to get hold of the accused. Once the accused are finally in the custody of the ICC, then we can start the trial. So you can see why I'm not expecting anything to happen very soon, actually how that process of investigation is going to be affected on the ground. Perhaps the material that has been collected, the video material and other documentary evidence and the evidence of eyewitnesses could count as sufficient evidence to continue the process. The other thing, part of evidence you're going to need is to prove the intention of the people accused of the crimes. And for that, you could probably use their statements to the press, their official pronouncements. So it may be possible to get a case together without actually visiting the scene of the crime.
Just on that, then, would it be easier, I wonder, legally to investigate potential war crimes, for instance, in cases where hospitals have been affected? Al-Shifa Hospital at the moment, we know, just yesterday was raided, and that raid has continued, I think, into today by Israeli forces who are justifying their operation there by saying that they believe that it's been used as a hub for Hamas. They say there are tunnels there. There have been questions about the veracity and the accuracy of the apparent video evidence they've now produced. Would that be an easier case to prosecute for war crimes when you say hospitals are supposed to be protected? The civilians within the hospital, by law, are supposed to be guaranteed protection in terms of humanitarian law?
I think it's a more obvious war crime to prosecute. It's more obviously a war crime, put it that way. And what Israel has done by producing this video claiming to show that Hamas is hiding in the hospital is also to admit that it's raiding the hospital, that it's conducting a raid. So what the International Criminal Court would have to do if it is investigating the case as a war crime is weigh up the proportionality of turning a hospital into a military target, which Israel is not allowed to do, unless it can produce a very good argument. So that weighing up the proportionality of treating a civilian target as a military target and the collateral civilian damage. And I think that is the sort of calculation that can be easily done from afar. I suppose the problem then becomes simply determining the veracity of the evidence that Israel has produced. I suspect even if it manages to show that there were some Hamas soldiers in that hospital or hiding underneath it, it would be very hard to establish that destroying the entire hospital was a proportional response.
Let's say Hamas is indeed conducting operations from within or beneath the surface at Al-Shifa Hospital. Is there room in international law for the group itself then to bear responsibility? Because Israel says the hospitals have become a legitimate target because Hamas is so embedded within the civilian population. So can Hamas be held criminally liable for, I don't know, shall we say, prompting, provoking the international response from Israel?
Well, in international humanitarian law, so the laws governing armed conflict, both sides have an obligation to comply with the principle of distinction. They're not allowed to mix civilian and military targets. So Hamas is not allowed to use civilian centers to carry out military work. So that would already be a war crime by Hamas if it were proven to be the case. Doing so, however, would not release Israel from the obligation of doing a very careful proportionality analysis, and it would not release Israel from its obligation to respect civilian targets. It would be very difficult to argue that the presence of even a substantial number of Hamas people within that hospital turns the entire hospital into a military target.
Cathy Powell, really good to speak to you as always. Cathy Powell is a legal expert joining us from UCT tonight. Thank you.